Thank you, and welcome again to our dinner meeting this evening. Before we go any further, please silence your cell phones. And I want to start with a thank you to Reed College Chemistry Professor Julie Foray, who many of you may not know, she has worked behind the scenes to make this venue available to us. It's a long tradition, but one that we very much appreciate. And also thank you to Bon Appetit, who is catering our dinner this evening. I have a few announcements. If there are others, please flag me at the end. Those of you on our email list should be aware of most of these. Our Young Chemist Committee, Women's Chemist Committee Reactor Tour here at Reed will be next Saturday the 22nd. We're also coming into the Northwest Science Expo fair season. It starts February 21st at Oregon Episcopal. Rob, you got that?
And if anybody happens to have background in microbiology, plant science, or animal science, we'd love to have some additional judging. It's a lovely time. Wonderful breakfast, lasagna for lunch, semi-friendly people.
There you go. That's a nice Saturday with some semi-friendly people. Friday. Thank you. Right, tomorrow, right, a week from tomorrow, 21st February. That's going to move on through all of March into, it includes the Northwest Science Expo, which is April 10th this year. The Chemistry Olympiad. It's that time of year. Armando, stand up and introduce yourself.
So I am learning how to do it from Martha's doing so much, and thank you publicly. And Nick has given us, kind of passed us over a lot of information to run it. The letters are out, the exams are on the way in the mail. We are looking to make direct contact to as many high school teachers as we can. I think our email is getting blocked by a spam filter. But there should be a switch on the internet that chemists go through. But I think that we are definitely on track and on time. The individuals who want to take the test can come up to Longview to take it on the 14th of March.
So the exams are held between the 2nd and the 13th. There's testing at Lower Columbia Community College in Longview on March 14th.
And then to be announced for the second round.
Yeah. Want to let you know, next month's meeting is going to be shifted by a day. This time, we're planning a special tribute for Reed Emeritus Professor Tom Dunn. And that, Tom's in a retirement home down in Tualatin, many of you know. And we've arranged for, we're working on getting some of his previous, or his thesis students to provide technical or science talks, and then we're going to have a reception and a nice dinner, and that will be here at Reed. That will be on Friday the 13th of March. Our Awards of Scholarship Recognition dinner will be on April 9th. Ann Bentley of Lewis and Clark will be the speaker. We will probably be holding it on the west side. Just want to let you know that Chemists Celebrate Earth Week is coming up in late April, 19th to the 25th. Norm in the Puget Sound section, Western Washington University is hosting this year at the end of June, 28th of June to July 1st. And BCCE, Bernie has provided at least 10 flyers per person here in the room tonight on the table in front of you, which is from the 18th to the 23rd of July. So take those back to your institutions, organizations, and so forth, and pass them out.
Don't forget about OSSF.
OSSF on April 4th. Thank you. I would have skipped over there. April 4th, OSSF. Again, you should be checking your emails, and I think you've got another couple of weeks to sign up through mid-March. Okay. With that, let me introduce our speaker for this evening. Alexander Kendall is a Northwest native, born and raised here. He earned his bachelor's from Western Washington University. In 2010, he went on to get a master's in synthetic chemistry from the University of Oregon. and a Ph.D. there in 2016. He was a National Science Foundation Graduate Research Fellow during much of that time when he worked with Professor David Tyler, focusing on the synthesis of inorganic and organometallic complexes bearing unique phosphine ligands. In 2016, he went to Pacific Northwest National Labs. He was a postdoc working with Michael Mock and Morris Bullock on nitrogen reduction subtask in the Center for Molecular Electrocatalysis. There he developed molecular transition metal complexes for catalytic nitrogen reduction using chromium and iron. In 2017, he went way back east to Woodbridge, Connecticut, and joined a startup company, P2 Science. This is a renewable chemical company founded by Paul Anastas of Yale. Any of you in the green chemistry arena will recognize that name. And last year, he returned here to the Northwest, and he's now working with Professor Carmen Pfeiffer at Oregon Health and Science University on biomaterials and bioactive plastics for healthcare. He's a man after my own heart. He has taken the Brownian motion pathway along his career. So his talk this evening is the chemistry of flavors and fragrances, a foray into industrial chemistry. Please welcome Alex Kendall.
I don't think I'll need this, but they might need it for the live stream, so I'll put this on. Need a button push over here? Yeah, there should be an AD mute. That's it. Thank you. All right, everybody can hear me? Sounds okay? Excellent. So thank you so much for that wonderful introduction. You're actually too kind. But I do want to say, I was born and raised here, and it's actually a real honor to be invited to our local ACS chapter to give a talk, because when I started out my career in chemistry, I never thought that I'd be doing stuff like this. I was kind of just interested in the typical stuff, right? Like, it's interesting, you can make bombs, whatever, and everybody kind of feels that going in. But I really got hooked, fell in love with it, and so to be able to share some of my story and some interesting stuff here with you today is just a true honor. So thank you very much. So what I'm going to tell you about today is I really want to focus on 3 points, and I'll just put it right up front. It's the chemistry of flavors and fragrances. Most people aren't super familiar with this industry in the sense that it's one of those things that's very under the radar. In fact, today we've all experienced flavor and fragrances. When we have food, when we have beer or wine or whatever, they all have these intrinsic parts in our lives. We don't necessarily think about that too much, though, because it's just kind of part of our lives. So what I want to talk about today is I hope I can show you that actually flavors and fragrances are this really deep cultural part of all of us as people. We evolved that way. It's deep in our history. And so it's not just kind of this offshoot of the mall where people sell perfumes. It's actually a really integral part of everybody's lives. 2 is that chemistry actually developed hand in hand with the flavor and fragrance industry, all the way back to about the 1800s. And we'll go into this. But I had no idea that almost all the original reactions in organic chemistry had to do with flavor and fragrance molecules, and there's a reason for that. And then finally, I'd like to show you that the chemical industry specifically, chemical innovations have huge market impact. And generally speaking, the reason is because there's a huge demand for flavors and fragrance, and if you're the one making the cheapest, you almost guarantee you get the entire market share. There's a lot of money and a lot of innovation that goes into this sector, and almost all of it's chemistry. So, now, we've already went over this pretty well, but I thought I'd just throw the logos up and maybe mention that when I was at Western, I worked for John Gilbertson. He's actually going to be hosting Norm up at Western. Yeah, John Gilbert, it was beautiful. And so this was highlighted a little bit, but I did grad school at Oregon and Western. I was an undergrad, and I did all inorganic chemistry. So when I started, I was interested in metals, catalysts. I still am, and I haven't lost that. At the University of Oregon with Dave Tyler, I ended up making a lot more synthetic. I worked with phosphines, and so it was all this inorganic, organic, organometallic synthesis, and it was just really deep into that. Finally kind of got away from that. At P&L, we made a ton of these complexes and actually got to a lot of catalysis, and it was like electrocatalysis. You've never seen a national lab, they just have all the toys. It's really fun to work at. And then I kind of went dog leg left over here and ended up at a renewable chemical company startup out of Yale. And I wasn't sure if these skills that I learned here, these inorganic skills, would translate into this place I'd never been in a field I'd never been in. And it turns out, and I hope to make the case to you, that training in inorganic chemistry, and I'm biased, but training in inorganic chemistry translates to just about any problem you want to solve. And I'm going to show you actually how I applied that to the field that I was in when I was at P2. And then currently, of course, I work at OHSU. Okay, so flavors and fragrances are more important, like I said, than you might think. And just to give an anecdote, I mean, you can look at these pictures. You know, here's a whole bunch of things that smell or taste. You could probably kind of close your eyes and imagine what an orange peel tastes like, or vanilla bean, or some burning incense. And it's the reason that people might be a little bit shocked to hear this is that humans actually have an incredible sense of smell. It's an 1800s myth that animals smell better than people. Okay, you can go in and scientifically prove it. They've actually done this. Right? There's a nice paper you can read about it. Basically, people have at least as good a smell as any creature on the planet. We're better at smelling some things. Certain animals are better at smelling things. We're all roughly equivalent in our general ability to smell. But humans have an extra special sense. It's called retronasal olfaction. We're the only creature on Earth that can do it. And what it is, and you experienced it tonight, which is what's so nice to get at dinner, is that while you're eating, you can smell the food that you're eating. The odor molecules actually go up behind your mouth and up into your olfactory glands. And so while you're eating, you can smell it. And that's why we prefer hot food to cold food. It tastes better because you can smell it while you're eating it. So why things don't taste good when you have a cold. You know, you can actually you plug your nose and eat, and it just literally doesn't taste as good because you can't smell it. You're not flushing over your olfactory with all those smells. And so because we likely evolved from that, actually, as we started to cook our food over fire, we started getting, we required food to be cooked, so we had to have like a much better organ for sensing whether or not our food was properly cooked. And so because of that, that's why we have chefs and dogs eat dog food. Like quite literally, the reason that we appreciate food is because we taste it in a different way than any other animal. Okay, so speaking of smells and taste, this is flavors and fragrances. There are definitely two halves of this equation, and I will say that the taste is the kind of the little brother to the odors, and that is, with your taste buds, there are 5 tastes that you can pick out. It's salty, sweet, spicy, sour, and umami or savory. Okay, we have 5 taste buds. They're all there. You can go find them, and things taste great, right? You can taste a whole bunch of stuff. When it comes to smells, it's absolutely incredible what kind of a dynamic range we have. So there are 391 identified human olfactory receptors. But these do not work immediately. These work in combination with each other. So they can all smell somewhat different molecules and actually work in aggregate. And so when you put this together combinatorially, that's 2 to the 391st power, or about 5 times 10 to the 117 unique smells that you're capable of picking up. Okay? And for all intents and purposes, that means literally everything can smell unique to you. And this is why when you go to your grandmother's house, literally nowhere else on earth smells like your grandmother's house, because you can pick up all of those subtle aromas and differences and really nail it down, because you have such a good, diverse smell receptor. So how does this interface with industry? This is Dorn Hines, who's an investor for BASF and P2, and he was talking to us one day and said something like BASF, a big German company, had determined something like 70% of preferences for consumables in the supermarket or wherever are basically driven by flavors and smells. When you buy top ramen, you want it to taste like your brand of top ramen, and they know that, and they're very good at kind of like delivering and packaging things just the way people like it. But it's an incredible driver in economics for consumers. This huge portion of the industry is driven by flavors and smells. So when we look at the smell, the flavor wheel is literally a 5-spoke wheel. It's very simple. But the odor wheel, because it's a continuum, there's no real way to represent it that's effective. And so these fragrance houses and perfumeries, what they do is Givaudan is one of them. Excuse me, hold on. Of course it's recorded. Just give me a second. We'll try again. Okay, so Givaudan is one of them, and they put together these odor wheels, which is truly a continuum. Okay, it doesn't really have real cutoffs, but it has these kind of families of odors, and you can mix and match these either across the wheel or next to the wheel. Those tend to be complementary. So to give you an idea of what some of these molecules look like, I'm a chemist, we're going to talk a lot about these molecules. You can go through things like ambrox, okay, and this actually had originally come from ambergris, which is like a whale secretion. It's actually mentioned in Moby Dick, surprisingly. It's now illegal to get it from whales. We make it synthetically. And amber, it smells wonderful. It's almost like Calvin Klein cologne has a lot of amber notes in it, so it's this really smooth kind of smell. This is muscone. It's this macrocyclic ketone. And And by the way, you can smell enantiomers. So for the musk family, if this one carbon is flipped, you can't smell it. Right? That's literally how good your sense of smell is. And this has a strong animal musk kind of smell. All the way to things like menthol. Menthol is this amazing monoterpenoid. It's got 3 stereocenters. We very much take it for granted. It's everything from gum to cigarettes, right? But it's actually a really difficult molecule to make. And there are things like floral would be like alpha ionone, which would be a strong smell of violets. So to give you an idea what kind of markets are out there for these things, muskone, right here, so this macrocycle. If you can't tell by looking, you squint at it, it doesn't look easy to make, I can tell you that right now. We make about 1 metric ton a year synthetically, and it's worth about $15,000 a kilogram. Okay? And the reason is because there's always going to be high demand for these odorants. And like I said, if you can make it cheaper, you can kind of take the market. And right now, the best we can do is about 1 metric ton, and it costs that much, but people are willing to pay it because they like the smell, which is kind of an unusual market. People would pay so much for something like that. But smells is one of those markets. Ambrox, which is, again, had originally come from Wales. Now we make it synthetically. We make about 100 metric tons a year. It's about $500 a kilogram. And then menthol is all the way down at the bottom of this, where we now make something like 15,000 metric tons a year, and it's like $12 a kilogram. And what's incredible about menthol is this number is about 5 times the amount of natural menthol you can get out of currently existing plants on Earth. So we're literally consuming much more than like the Earth could produce. It's because we can make it synthetically, and that drives down the price, and it kind of just gets incorporated into everything. And so there's one company that makes menthol, and they have something like 75% of the market. And that's Takasago. Okay, so let's talk about molecules that smell. This is just one huge family of molecules that smell. That's what I'm going to talk about. Not everything I'm going to talk about is going to be a terpene. This is the terpene family. But a lot of them are. In fact, a lot of the flavor and fragrance focuses on the terpene family. There's thousands, if not hundreds of thousands, of terpenes and terpenoids in the environment around us. They come from animals, they come from plants. They're just these essential building blocks that are in everything that's living on Earth. In fact, isoprene, which is the simplest building block right here, you can actually detect on human breath. Okay, so like you're actually breathing in isoprene right now at detectable levels. If you put 2 of these together, you can make structures like limonene. If you put 3 of these together, you get things like humulene. 4 of these together, and you can kind of mix and match how you want to do it, but you get these really complicated structures. And what's interesting about this is isoprene, you almost can't smell at all. We're almost immune to this. But as soon as you start putting these together, these have really strong citrus smell now, and it's got a high vapor pressure because it's a small molecule. You go to humulene, which is actually part of what makes beer kind of bitter. It's also in around here, a lot of the cannabis industry has like humulene notes. It's got this earthy wood flavor. And then when you start getting kind of these bigger molecules, they start having lower vapor pressures, so it's got a weaker smell, but you can still smell it. And they're important for other things in biology. To show you what I mean by it's just build these building blocks. It's isoprene is the basic building unit, and then you can see it's actually got that same structure. Just 2 of them put together for a monoterpene, 3 of them put together is called a sesquiterpene, and then 4 of them put together here would be a diterpene, which is silly nomenclature. That's just the way they say it. But they all have the C5H8 architecture. Now what I've shown you is terpenes. This is just hydrocarbons, very simple. But let me give you an example of how diverse this family is. If we just take this limonene core, the core of that molecule is called the paramethane core, so it's just this skeletal structure. If we now look at, you can literally go to Sigma Aldrich or wherever and look at what kinds of terpenes you can buy, or terpenoids in this case now because they have oxygen on them, with the paramethane core, you find this huge host of different molecules. And what's even more incredible about this, one, they're all naturally occurring. We have sources for all of these, so they're actually very inexpensive. So natural product chemists that have to do all these really chiral syntheses, there's a review down here. They love these things. They're cheap, they're chiral, you can throw them in. They're already building blocks for natural products. But what's maybe more incredible is these all smell and taste different to every one of you. Okay, you can actually discriminate almost every single terpene. And the reason is because we evolved with these as part of our environment. They're an essential part of plant and animal matter. And so we have an especially good discrimination of the terpene family, including terpenoids. And that goes, again, with enantiomers or individual stereocenters. And so there's just a ton of work that people do in turning one terpene into another, or utilizing these and finding better ways to be synthetically. So again, we evolve with these, and then I'm actually going to show you that these odorants in general have been just cherished throughout history, which is not something to really think about. So historically, odorants are incredibly important. And here's a little timeline just with some highlights. So the earliest archaeological evidence of the use of odorants actually goes back to about 800,000 BC. And some archaeologists found that people had been using sesame oil, and they'd been either cooking with it or using it for like a fumigation or for smells, but they could tell they weren't just eating it, they were actually doing something specifically for odor purposes. probably about 1 million years before this with fire. So even though this is the earliest evidence, there's probably going back almost 2 million years that we had been cooking and working with fire, and that's when we started developing these senses. So there's no wonder that all of our early ancestors into the Bronze Age were absolutely enamored with things that smell. You can go back to the earliest written human epic, which is the Epic of Gilgamesh, and it's from about 3000 BC. And part of it is they talk about cedarwood fumigation. And fumigation is to burn these kind of aromatic, woods, and they smell very nice. And so that's, that was an integral part of Bronze Age, early states, and we can tell that kind of in the first text that we have access to. Pharaohs actually would burn these different things. Here's actually a bas-relief showing they would burn this like incense type stuff. And again, it was for these ceremonies, for state ceremonies, for all kinds of stuff. It was a very integral part of their culture. And now, I want to keep it with the industrial side. You say, so what? Okay, people like to smell nice. Let me give you an idea of scale. If you look at Babylon, which again is a Bronze Age culture, it's one of the first states where they really rose up and built a civilization. They were burning 29,000 kilograms of incense annually at just one temple, the Bell Temple in Babylon. We have pretty good records of that. Okay, 29,000 kilograms of incense cost a lot of money in the Bronze Age, a lot of money. And what's interesting is that an early state would want to pay for this much incense to smell when they could have paid for armies, they could have paid for farmers, or any of these other essential things to keep their cultures going. But they placed such a high value on odor and molecules and smells that they were willing to spend this kind of money on having access to incense. Okay? And so I think it's actually just a really nice example of what kind of value human society has placed on flavor and fragrance in this case. Maybe a little bit more cheeky. Helen of Troy, it is argued, was actually beautiful not because of her looks, but because she invented cosmetic perfumery, and she smelled very nice, and there's a lot of, rumors about that. The idea that she's actually credited kind of in mythology with inventing cosmetic perfumery. In this case, unfortunately, that entire field started also with the last great Bronze Age war that we've all read about in Homer's epics. But it's actually an integral part of it, which I think is interesting. Aristotle, one of the great thinkers, the Stoics, when we hark back to him and think about what he did, he praised the aesthetics of smell and loved it. So this is something that even our great academic thinkers from the Greek age were just enamored with. One of the earliest doctors, the Roman Galen, who used to cut open dead gladiators, he was the first one to actually cut open noses and look at how the sense of smell worked in an organ kind of way. About 250 AD, we start getting some real science coming in. Okay, this is where technology comes in. The first stills are invented in Alexandria. People start to actually purify things. They start to try to understand, how you can condense them and then use it. And it's really 750 years later, the Persians master this when they get steam distillation. Hopefully, we've all done Gen Chem or OChem. And what's interesting about steam distillation is that has not changed in 1,000 years. This is still how we make essential oils. It's the exact same technology. And so, from here on out, Persia controls a huge market because they can steam distill, they have the technology, and they're kind of the center of the world for essential oils. It's not until about the early 19th century, this Frenchman, who I will not try to even hazard his name, begins characterizing terpene oils with elemental analysis. And now we have a way of purifying these things, and we have a way of determining what they're made of, and it opens the door for the flavor and fragrance industry to start making these things synthetically. So, like I said, this goes hand in hand with the original organic chemistry. For the first time in history, in the early 19th century, people could actually determine what molecular composition these molecules are, and so they could begin to tinker with making them. The other advantage of these types of molecules is these are very small molecules, okay, so they're easy to work with. You can distill them, like I said. And then, I always wondered myself, how in the world do they know they were making what they thought they would? In this case, when you're working with fragrance molecules, you can clean it by distillation. You can smell it. You can get elemental analysis. You know exactly what that molecule is. And so they were getting positive identifications of these without a GCMS, without any of the cool stuff that we have today, because they could just, smell it and they get an EA and immediately know what it was. And so the first fragrance molecule that was ever synthesized was in 1832. Friedrich Müller, who's just a huge all-star in organic chemistry, synthesized a benzaldehyde. Okay, and the way he does it, he takes toluene, you do a radical chlorination at that methyl group. This is now poised to just be hydrolyzed off to get benzaldehyde. And if you've worked with aldehydes before, aldehyde syntheses are actually pretty difficult typically. So what's amazing about this, these guys were able to make benzaldehyde 25 years before August Kekule's theory of chemical structure. They didn't even know what a benzene ring looked like, and they were able to make this thing synthetically, which it's just absolutely incredible. But again, that's the power of your nose. They were able to positively ID it because they knew exactly what it's supposed to smell like. So William Henry Perkin, who's again another all-star in organic chemistry, is credited with actually beginning the fragrance and flavor industry when he synthesizes coumarin, and that comes from the salicylic aldehyde. He does the Perkin reaction with an acetic anhydride. What this does is it basically condenses on and then cyclizes the ring, and you get coumarin. And this is it's got a kind of a hay or fresh cut grass smell. What's amazing about this is he was able to get just gobs of this stuff. Whereas before they had to steam distill it, it was very rare. And so immediately, within like 10 years, they would start releasing these huge batches of perfume. And this one's actually still around today. It's this Foray Royale, which was in 1882. You can still literally go out and buy this. And it's just loaded with coumarin because they had suddenly synthetic access to it and they were making it industrially. So before this time, especially Perkin, people had only been able to get these odorant molecules from natural sources, right? You go out and cut a whole bunch of grass and steam distill it. It's very laborious. Now we're taking these very simple molecules that we can get from ubiquitous places and really upgrade them to something of high value. Perkin also used the same reaction to synthesize cinnamic acid. Again, same reaction, just with benzaldehyde, and now people had synthetic access to cinnamon flavor without having to grow, cinnamon bark and then do the whole extraction and distillation. So this was actually a huge, just like revolutionized the way people use fragrance and got food, because now we have all these flavors that people have access to. So Gunther Olaf, who kind of wrote the book on fragrance and flavors, says that commercial perfumery became possible when the commercial synthesis of pure nature-identical odorants with that advent. And so now that we can identify what these things are, we can start synthesizing them. You can make a huge batch of this stuff, really pure, really cheap, and people will pay for it. Okay? And I'll tell you a story about that right here. Ferdinand Tiemann, who's again a huge fragrance guy in organic chemistry, he invented this Riemer-Tiemann reaction, of course, with his coworker Riemer. And one of the things that they did is they were actually able to first isolate vanillin in 1879. What they did is this reaction is pretty cool. You take a chloroform and you actually use strong base, and you can generate a carbene, which will add on here as a dichloride, and then you can hydrolyze that off like we saw earlier, getting the aldehyde. And vanillin is very high value at this time, but the price of this absolutely drops, and they pick up the entire market, and then all of a sudden all these perfumes have vanillin in them because it's now commercially available. One of his more challenging syntheses, very audacious, is in 1893, he studied ionone, which are these two isomers, which is the smell and the essence of violets. And they had a little bit of the violet oil because it was very expensive. They got the empirical formula, and he said, you know what, I think we can take citral, which comes from orange rind, we can do an aldol condensation with acetone, and it's going to match the empirical formula we got. He gets this molecule, pseudoionone. He smells the reaction flask, which you can do in flavor and fragrance chemistry. He smells it, no violets, okay? And they didn't know the structure, and so he's disappointed, does whatever a good chemist does. He hands it off to his assistant to take away from him. And this is a true story. Only when the laboratory assistant cleaned the reaction vessel with sulfuric acid did Tiemann's unerring nose recognize the most typical violet odor. And so it turns out that just cleaning the flask was the serendipity of cyclizing this using an acid catalyzed cyclization to get actually almost the perfect mix of these two isomers. And so, look, I know some of you are in the audience and you're like, dude, so what? He needs some violets, right? I thought we were going to talk about industry. Here's the so what. This is a big deal. At the time, 1 kilogram of violet oil, composed mostly of this, cost about 80,000 gold German marks, okay? Totally leaving Germany's economy aside. You just look at the weight of gold in a German gold mark at the time. That ends up being about almost 30 kilograms of gold, or roughly $1.2 million per kilogram in today's dollars. Okay, so when somebody tells you, like, there's a lot of money in chemistry, like, they're not joking. This was a big deal. And what they actually did is they wanted to found a flavor and fragrance house that's still around, and they obviously just cornered the market because nobody else could make this. You can't get enough violet oil out of violets. And so that's just an all-star awesome story. That was so cool. So now I'm an inorganic chemist. I like organometallics, and many people don't know this if you're a fan of organometallics, but Gringer discovers this reaction in 1901. At the time, he's working for this guy, Barbier. It's his boss. I think he's in grad school at the time. And, he develops his reagent, the methyl magnesium iodide, the Gringer reagent. And what they're actually trying to make at the time, and many people don't know this, was this fragrance molecule, melon-hepinol, which has a strong flavor of melon. That was their synthetic target. They wanted to make it because it was worth money. Well, Gringer figures out this reaction, he gets it to work, and of course everybody's celebrating. About 10 years later, Gringer's very popular, and I think Barbier was a little upset about this. So in 1910, he's in some review saying, Barbier gives it as his opinion that the credit of the discovery of the reaction really belongs to him, suggesting the name the Barbier-Gringer reaction. Okay, and as we all know, of course, Grignard is awarded the Nobel Prize in 1912, shares it with another organometallic chemist who is not Barbier. And posterity remembers this as the Grignard reaction, not the Barbier-Grignard reaction. However, some things never change. I thought that sentiment was so academic, it was just hilarious. But nonetheless, the first Grignard was actually on a flavored fragrance molecule. So now we're going to talk about these macrocycles. I introduced this one earlier, muscone. It actually comes, it's an animal source. It comes from the saber-toothed deer. This is not a joke. It lives in Siberia. It is, I think, now endangered because they get, it's illegal to hunt these and extract the musk. But these are poached really, really badly because it's so valuable. Like I said, $2,000 a kilogram to get this molecule, so people kill this deer. So this is a sad story, but I promise there's a silver lining. Anyways, these molecules were known for a long time as fragrance molecules. And in the 30s and 40s, this guy, Leopold Ruzicka, is studying these two molecules and determines that they're macrocycles. And at the time, nobody has any idea what a macrocycle is. There's no theory for ring strain that goes beyond 6-membered rings, really. And so he's kind of laughed out a little bit. He's like, listen, Ruzicka, like, you don't know what you're talking about, right? And so in classic chemistry fashion, not only did he discover the structure of these molecules that no one had identified before, but no one believed him. So he invented new chemistry to prove he was right. Right? So he invented the Ruzicka reaction, and actually showed by condensing this diacid with thorium, you can get to acetone positively IDing its structure, which could only have come from this macrocyclization at the ketone. And so, just beautiful chemistry. For this, he's awarded the Nobel Prize in 1939 because he totally upended everybody's theory of ring strain and ring structure. But I just love that. Like, they don't believe you just, invent a new reaction and prove yourself right. This is incredible. Okay, so how do people actually make these molecules in industry? And again, this is for deers being hunted to extinction or poached to extinction is more clear. But one of the reasons is this is a hard molecule to make. It's very, very, very difficult to make. This is only one synthesis. This is probably one of the more prevalent ones. But the point is that this is kind of what it looks like. You can imagine on an industrial scale. We'll walk through it. But on an industrial scale, none of this is going to be easy. And that's why we can only make 1 metric ton years, because it's actually very difficult. If you hand this to an engineer, they're going to, shatter their coffee mug in anger because they're not going to do any of this. And I mean, if you look at it, cyclododecanone is the starting material. It's actually not very expensive. You can do a Stokes condensation with the succinic acid with a methyl derivative on it. So it's the diester. And this just kind of plucks that right onto there. You can then do a series of steps that are pretty simple. It's just a isomerization of this alkene, ring closure, and decarboxylation under these really strong dehydrating basic conditions afterwards. And you get to this 5-member ring fused to a 12-member ring. And this is where Eschenmoser actually in the 70s developed the really big advent here. And that's if you epoxidize this double bond with hydrogen peroxide, so you get a little epoxide there. Then you condense on this methyl sulfonate hydrazine derivative on the ketone. You end up with this molecule, which I'm sure everybody can tell is perfectly poised for the venerable Eschenmoser fragmentation. What the Eschenmoser fragmentation does is it basically just opens these rings up and leaves behind a ketone and an alkyne. And now we don't want an alkyne, right? So you can hydrogenate that very gently and you end up with muscone. What's interesting here is that you actually get a racemic mixture, so only 50% of that is potent. The other 50% is basically just diluting it. So why does it cost that much? It's very difficult to make macrocycles. You can't all do it the way that Ruzicka did in this particular case. But this brings me to an interesting point. So we've all got families that, I don't know, I'm a chemist and I'm like the only chemist in the family. And so everybody thinks, I make explosives and you probably like Breaking Bad and you make drugs. Well, look, while all of that's very funny, I actually looked this up. Breaking Bad, right? He's a chemist who starts to make drugs to make money. Look, at $15,000 a kilogram, this is actually worth more than street meth. And it's not illegal, okay? So next time your family brings it up, and you can make drugs, you can tell them, oh no, actually, I'm going to go in the shed and start making some muscle. There's some real cash in it. That's in no way a joke. Seriously, you can make this, and if you can undercut that price tag, you could actually capture the market. So, anyway. Another example, here's an example where we start to get into more organometallic catalysis. And the civet, this is the African civet, is not endangered. In fact, it will probably never be endangered because nobody hunts it for its muscle. They used to, they don't anymore. Why? The answer is because we found a really good way to make the acetone that people want out of this animal. And so here's how we make this, the modern synthesis, absolutely beautiful. You take methyl oleate, this is actually biodiesel. This comes from soybeans that have been transesterified with the methyl group. Okay, so it's literally, people burn this for fuel, but this is biodiesel. You take a Grubbs catalyst, which he was awarded, that he shared the 2005 Nobel Prize for this work to do catalysis, and you can get some percentage of this diester, with that by just swapping around these double bonds. You can selectively get that out, do a Dieckmann condensation, it's very selective, pull these two esters together. You then end up with this beta-keto acid, which is easily decarboxylated under very gentle basic conditions, and that delivers you to the cetone. And then again, it's a very strong muscle flavor. So, because this has less steps, it's very economical, its catalysis just works great to get this enriched. This stuff only costs, it's less than $100 a kilogram. In fact, I looked on Alibaba this morning, it's something like 25, okay? And if you ever want to know what it costs on Alibaba, it's actually very accurate. So, this stuff is well less than $100 a kilogram. And that's because this is a really good synthesis. This stuff is 15,000, it's very difficult to make. So if you want to help some animals, again, break bad and find a better way to make muscle, like for real. Okay, I'll give you another example. We talked also about menthol. That's this molecule over here. And I'm going to show the case study of how catalysis improved this. So menthol is naturally occurring in corn mint oil. I'm sure we're all familiar. It's got a cooling effect when it's in your mouth. It also has like a mint flavor. It's in quite literally everything, from like deodorants to cigarettes. It wasn't always that way though, because the way they used to make menthol, this is the Harman Reamer synthesis. They started a fragrance house, and this is how they used to make it. So there are 3 stereo centers here, I want to point out, and they all have to be correct to be menthol that smells and tastes right. Otherwise, you actually get off flavors. So here's how they did it. This is just like a classic OChem beef, and this is probably going to give some people PTSD if they took an OChem lab like this. We start with metacreosol, which is a throwaway product from the petroleum industry. You do a phenol crass alkylation to add your isopropyl group. And this whole thing is just indiscriminately reduced under rainy nickel to get you all of the isomers here. So these are all squiggles, which means they're all going up and down at the same time, which means you end up with 4 diastereomers, which are all here, and they have great names like neomenthol and neoisomenthol. But these are all also racemic, which I haven't shown just to save space. So there's actually 8 different molecules in here, and you want the one. So how in the world did they do this? Right? It's a tour de force is the answer. Well, as we all recall, diastereomers have different physical properties. So you can actually do a fractional distillation to get your plus and minus menthol away from these. Albeit difficult, you can do it. These are fragrance guys, so they know what they're doing. Now you've got these two enantiomers put together. Well, you can esterify this with benzoyl chloride to get to this benzyl ester of both of these enantiomers, and you can very carefully fractionally crystallize this out, scrape out the crystals that are yours, saponify those back to menthol, and voila. Not so far, right? Well, menthol is not $12 a kilogram because of this. It was much, much more expensive. The reason it's $12 a kilogram is because Takasago found a better way. Okay? And the way what Takasago did is they started immersing, again, this is kind of a throwaway product from petroleum and plant industry. It's very ubiquitous. It's actually a very simple terpene. But they found out that if you do a lithium-catalyzed anti-Markovnikov hydroamination, okay, so that's where you add the NH across this bond, getting the N on the terminal, and this is radical control, that's why you get anti-Markovnikov. It also isomerizes this double bond internally, so there's no stereo centers yet, but this is where the genius comes in. And this is actually Noyori, won his 2001, or he shared the 2001 Nobel Prize for his work on this chirocatalyst for this exact process. So it was actually for the binary doing this type of process. But what happens is just very gently, this rhodium one with binary, it's got a chiral backbone, is able to isomerize this one bond from an allylamine to a vinylamine, thereby making this a stereo center. See how subtle that is? But because this is chiral, it does it with a huge enantio-enrichment. Okay, yeah, 1 stereo center, 2 to go. So what happens next? Well, so next you can hydrolyze this off and get to citronellal, which is actually a really high-value fragrance molecule in its own right, and then the magic happens, okay? And this is where you can put it in zinc bromide and just heat it, and the whole thing cyclizes, and you get this molecule isopulagol, 60% of this single isomer. Absolutely beautiful. And then isopulagol is just 2 hydrogens away from being menthol. There's no stereo centers you have to worry about, so it's very simple. And what's really nice is you can take the off product, at 40%, you can actually send it right back. And the reason is because the chemistry that's required to do this is an ene reaction, which is electrocyclic. And these electrocyclic or really controlled reactions are very sensitive to stereochemistry. In this case, it has to form a ring transition state, and that one methyl group actually pushes this all into the right conformation to get your menthol derivative out the back end in really high yield. And so Takasago invented this, and they literally make like 75% of the menthol in the world. No one's ever going to substitute them because they have this down so well. And they get nearly 100% yield of menthol from their starting material. They don't have any off products because they can recycle the long isomers. So just beautiful chemistry, and a great example where inorganic chemistry may be able to make a huge difference. Oops. Okay, and again, maybe a little cheeky, but I thought this was kind of cool. You know, we spend so much time with Wikipedia like when you find things like this. In 1985, Mattel invented the first smelly toy in history. It was the Stench of Evil stink door of the He-Man series. And the way they made it smell bad, and only an Oregon audience would appreciate this, is they embedded patchouli oil into the plasticization process. The plastics actually capture in the network a whole bunch of patchouli oil, and it just slowly releases it over time. If you're not familiar with patchouli, which, you know, maybe you are, maybe you aren't, it's got this very earthy, mushroomy smell. It's very unmistakable. And no joke, this was the first smelling toy, but these things are like 30 plus years old, and apparently they still just reek of patchouli. You can buy them online in collector's items. Which again is kind of silly, and I will say that they have not yet avoided the but you know, I'm sure they're just waiting for one of the creators to die, and they'll figure it out. But what I thought this was a really nice example of what Albert Eschenloser had kind of foreseen in the 70s, which is we all agree the emphasis in synthetic research is shifting toward the synthesis of properties, not just compounds. And so in the 20th century, the flavor and fragrance industry is actually moving away from making identical products and just blending these together to making materials and things that have properties they want that are all new, brand new. Okay, and so there's a huge amount of research that goes into making new fragrance molecules where there were none before. They're kind of non-natural, synthetic, but they have all the properties you want, and they're really easier to make. So that's actually a big movement forward in the late 20th century. So to give you an idea of what are still problems out there in the world, I just kind of pulled out 3 classes here. These animal-derived molecules. So again, I talked about ambrox. This again comes from whales. It's currently illegal to get ambergris from a whale and then sell it on the market, even though that's where it comes from. So please don't do that if you find ambergris in the beach. You have to turn it in, actually. Muscone, we've already talked about this, but if you can find better synthetic pathways here, people won't be so inclined to kill whales, which is still a thing that happens, or, you know, kill these musk deer because they want these odorants. You could actually, if you make them synthetically, then we could actually help animal populations. Another thing that people have a big problem with in the flavor industry is this particular set of molecules. These are called the mint lactones. And I left this one ambiguous. Basically, every isomer of this has really high value if and only if it is enantio-pure. And the EE's got to be like 99.9. Otherwise, the perfumers do not want it because the wrong isomers or enantiomers will actually pollute the flavor. And so, to give you an example, the highest value one is wine lactone. That's this molecule right here. Wine lactone is the single, you have the most sensitivity to wine lactone over any other molecule on Earth. You can smell wine lactone down to 10 femtograms per liter in air, which is absolute, not pico, femto. So, you know, you can literally smell this thing a mile away. It just kind of smells like oranges. But this is a very high value target. People have a really hard time getting all these stereo centers locked in just right. So if you can get really high EE enrichments, there's a huge market in this that people are currently studying. The third kind of area is non-renewable feedstocks. And so here's a very strong smelling molecule, trans-2,9-enal. It smells like very strong buckwheat. It's also attributed to the smell of aging people. Like no joke, I wish I was making that up. But allegedly old folks' homes kind of have this odor. It's a very pungent molecule. And then a derivative of this, which is actually just a methyl ester, is the neofolio, which smells like sweet apples. Now, these are really high-value commodity chemicals, but they're almost entirely derived from petroleum. And you can see this actually comes from hydroformylation of hydrocarbons. It's really cheap and easy to do, but that's not a renewable source. So there's a lot of interest in actually getting renewable sources for some of the commodity chemicals that are already not too expensive, but we'd like to make them better. To summarize, I hope I've shown you that flavor and fragrance industry is actually highly prized, not just by current societies. Perfumes are always locked up in a case, but ancient societies also spent a considerable amount of their GDP in these original first states on basically perfume, and that's something that if it wasn't highly prized they wouldn't have done because they needed that money elsewhere. But they again had a huge value on it. Unfortunately, what that does mean is in the modern time we have such a thirst for it that some of this can be environmentally destructive if we get it from natural sources. They don't have a synthetic supplement, as in the case of the musk deer. I hope I'll show you that flavor and fragrances were an integral part of developing modern chemistry. I was quite frankly shocked when I found out the first Rader reaction was on a flavor fragrance molecule. It's just so bizarre if you don't think about it. But that's because people could purify and positively ID it at the time. It was kind of a perfect trifecta of technology, the main component being your nose. And like I said, the first Barbier Rader reaction was a fragrance molecule. In P2 science, we did ozonite decomposition that yielded these high-value products directly through a disproportionation mechanism, which there is more or less no evidence for. No one's done that in the literature so far, so it's kind of seen catalysts that can do this very selectively. And that just felt really great because I was, sticking it to big oil, helping American farmers, and then, helping save the cows, which have it rough enough. So it was actually, I'm very proud of that. I think it's a huge hurdle that we've overcome there, and that was just one project, that I worked on. But hurdles still exist, and this is what I kind of mentioned, is we need to get better renewable resource starting materials for these. People need better enantio-enriched formulas, so we don't have to go to natural product sources. We can make these pure enough, we don't have to get them from animals. Like in the case of muscone, if you can get that, I thought I had it here, but if you can get this one enantio-enriched, people would actually start buying it synthetically because it would be polluted down. So there's a huge need in this industry for catalysis, for green chemistry, and then one thing that I learned I'd like to share, most people don't know this about industry, is that investors, venture capital investors, now have a term for this, where they're not just investing in what's going to make them money. They're investing in things that have long-term stability, because they realize that there's, global warming, all kinds of changes, there's political unrest. And so the term for that is called ESG investment strategy. So if you want to start a green chemical company, look for people that are ESG investors. That stands for environment, government, and social. The idea is that you invest in something that's going to be stable for at least 50 years, meaning renewable resources, stable governments, things like that. Not just going to get a quick buck. Okay, so there's actually a hugely influential and modern venture capital strategy that came out of Harvard, and it's really starting to get rolled out. It's how P2 got founded, actually. And then my final point, of course, and I'm very biased, is, look, inorganic chemists solve all these problems. So everybody who's got to hire an inorganic chemist really know what to do. So, anyways, with that, I do want to thank the funding. It was actually the United Soybean Board funded the project with P2 Science. Obviously, the local section here, Dr. Ken Schreiber, for inviting me. All elected officials and student affiliates, and everybody that's here tonight. Professor Lewis Coe as well. He actually, I gave this talk to him, and he's the one that recommended me. I'd like to thank the venue, Reed College, a beautiful campus, the staff and representatives here. Thank you so much for the room. And then, of course, my current employer will really come talk about this at OHSU, biomaterial and biomechanics. So with that, I'll take any questions. Thank you very much.
Dave?
Your ozonolysis disproportionation.
Yeah.
How do you control which end goes where?
Yeah, I would love to talk about that. It is proprietary. I showed literally as much as I could. All I can say about it is the catalyst is less than $50 a kilogram. It's extremely inexpensive to recycle.
And you can control which side picks the acid.
Mm-hmm. It's a very cool technology. I wish
Only an organic chemist would catch that.
Yeah, it is. That was actually a challenge, very seriously, because it's long chains on both sides. But there's a clever way to do it.
For the muscone synthesis, you say that it is racemic. How much of the synthesis is racemic? Like, can they not start with the chiral diester at the start?
Oh, I see. Yes.
Or is there like a loss?
There is a problem when you start with the chiral center. So I've actually done that synthesis. It is thwarted. If you notice, I didn't include yields, and that's on purpose. They're like 10%. They're not clean reactions. When you start with the chiral center, it affects the. There's a part of it that actually it racemizes because of the intense conditions. So it gets deprotonated and becomes an alkene as that alkene walks around during the isomerization. And so you end up isomerizing. You do still get it enantio-enriched, but you end up you lose almost all of your EE because you have to really bake it to get that thing to ring close and decarboxylate. And in that process, around a little bit, it happens to hit that chiral center. So that's a good question.
So do they just cut their losses and start with the racemic starting material?
Yeah, that's almost what everybody does. You can actually get the chirally enriched one is not very expensive because it comes from a plant precursor. It's very inexpensive to make. You just don't get the enrichment doesn't hold because the Stobie condensation is real, or not Stobie condensation, but the next recyclization is really a heat and beat, and it's like 150 degrees for like 12 hours, and the alkene just walks all around it at a time, so you don't really need that chiral center there.
I'm going to ask.
Okay, yeah.
Yeah, we're as someone who once looked in lignin and gave up as a hopeless problem. Where are we today in
getting anything other than fuel value?
Yeah, that's a good question. I was actually about to answer. People make jet fuel out of it now. That's a big upgrade. That's out of National Labs. I think it's Kendall. They do a lot of lifting stuff. That's the only reason I'm familiar with it. People have just struggled with lignin. I mean, I went to a DOE conference in 2017, and they had like 20 groups working on lignin, and it was from every aspect of it is difficult. The biologists have a hard time digesting it because of the makeup, and it's so tightly woven, and all those other things. The chemists find it really recalcitrant, like you can't just boil it in sulfuric acid and get it to fall apart. You know, it's like almost no aspect of it is trivial. But yeah, the one thing they do is they char it. They do a light char and get oils out, and then that's when they turn to jet fuel. To my knowledge, that's currently the best they can do, and it's still not very good. So, and Burton.
Are the soybean oil, is that what's making these new artificial hamburgers all artificial?
Oh, I'm sure it is actually. So as a slight aside, the USB had to go to a soybean conference to present our work because they invested in us. And so I got to sit through, this is not a joke, 3 days of what do people use soybeans for scientifically. And I would tell you what the biggest use for it is right now is asphalt plasticizer. So when I would have guessed, what happens is when asphalt dries out, it's cracked. Everybody's seen that, right? It's just oxidative stress because asphalt's made of basically gravel and then like these kind of polymerized heavy polymers, and that's the black stuff. What happens is it slowly oxidizes and you lose that elasticity and it starts cracking. So what they do is they take soybean oil and they epoxidize it, and then they just spray it onto the asphalt on a super hot day, and it literally leaches in and then starts cross-linking. And you end up replasticizing the road. And they take huge amounts of soybeans, or soybean oil, and replasticize roads all over the country with it. It's an amazing industry. And I literally never heard of anything like that. So we were the only ones there that were actually making chemical upgrade products. Everybody else was putting it in materials, almost exclusively for asphalt. So that's, I'm sure they're making hamburgers out of it too, though, to answer your question. You can make almost anything out of soybeans.
All right. Other questions? If not, let's thank Alex again. And with that, we will adjourn until next month. Remember, Friday the 13th of March is our date for Tom Dunn's tribute presentation.